My phone vibrated against my palm. A cold interruption during the biggest fundraising gala of the year. Grant's text lit up the screen saying he was leaving for Aspen with his mistress and had drained our joint account. I checked the balance. 0. My hand remained steady as I finished my champagne and whispered into the crowded room. "Thank you. Grant, you just officially activated Clause 14B. My name is Carolyn Southgate, and if you had looked at me from across the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel that evening, you would have seen a woman standing at the absolute zenith of her existence. The chandeliers were casting a fractured, golden light over the 300 guests, every one of them a titan of New York industry or society. This was the annual Velvet and Steel Gala, the crown jewel of my event-planning empire. And everything about the night was perfect. The orchids were the exact shade of white I had mandated. The champagne was vintage 1998. And I, dressed in a structureless sheath of black silk that cost more than my father's first car, was holding court. I was 34 years old, and I had curated my life with the same ruthless precision I applied to my table settings. There was no room for error, no space for the unexpected, or so I thought. I was in the middle of laughing at a joke made by Arthur Pendleton, a man who owned half the commercial real estate in Midtown. When my phone vibrated against the palm of my hand, it was a single, sharp buzz. Usually, during an event, I would ignore it. My team knew better than to disturb me unless the venue was on fire, but this was my personal phone, the one only 5 people in the world had the number for. I excused myself with a graceful nod, stepping just slightly out of the direct glare of the spotlight, but remaining visible enough to still command the room. I lifted the device. The screen was bright, offensive in the dim romantic lighting. It was from Grant. My husband of 7 years, the man who, just this morning, had kissed me on the forehead and told me he would call me as soon as he landed in Chicago for his sales conference. The message was not a greeting, it was a paragraph, a long, blocky wall of text that looked like a jagged scar across the glass. "Carolyn," it began, no nickname, no affection. "I cannot do this anymore. I am suffocating. I cannot stand your control, your coldness, your obsession with perfection. I am done. I am leaving. By the time you read this, Sienna and I will be halfway to Aspen. Do not try to find us, and do not bother checking the joint account. I have withdrawn everything. Consider it compensation for the 7 years of my life I wasted living in your shadow. Goodbye." For a second, the words did not register as language. They were just shapes. Sienna. The name floated to the surface of my mind. Sienna was the 23-year-old Pilates instructor he had hired 6 months ago to help with his flexibility. She was a girl who posted inspirational quotes on Instagram with spelling errors and used too many emojis. Grant had left me for a walking cliché. My heart did not pound. My breath did not hitch. In fact, a strange, crystalline silence seemed to descend over me, separating me from the noise of the jazz band and the clinking of crystal glasses. It was as if the world had slowed down, allowing me to process the catastrophe with the detached curiosity of a surgeon looking at a tumor. My thumb moved automatically, swiping away the message and opening the banking application. Face ID recognized me instantly. I tapped on the account labeled Household Joint. This was the account we used for everything: the mortgage on the penthouse, the maintenance fees, the summer rental in the Hamptons, the daily expenses. It was the account I dutifully deposited a percentage of my dividends into every quarter, trusting Grant to manage the household overhead because he had complained that I made him feel useless if I handled everything. The screen loaded. Balance, $0.00. Yesterday, there had been $450,000 in that account. It was gone, all of it. The money I had earmarked for the property taxes, the liquid cash reserve. He had swept it clean. I stared at the zero. It was a perfect circle, a void staring back at me. Grant had not just left. He had tried to cripple me. He had planned this. He had waited until the night of my biggest gala, knowing I would be distracted, knowing I would be public, knowing I would be vulnerable. He wanted me to collapse. He wanted me to scream, to run out of the ballroom with mascara running down my face, to become the hysterical, abandoned wife that would make his betrayal seem justified. "See?" he would say. "She is crazy. I had to leave." I looked up from the phone. Arthur Pendleton was still waiting for me to finish my thought. The room was still spinning with wealth and power. If I broke now, if I showed even a hairline fracture of distress, the rumor mill would grind velvet and steel into dust by morning, in my world. Perception was currency. A woman who could not keep her husband could not be trusted to keep a brand. I took a sip of my champagne. It was still cold. "Forgive me, Arthur," I said, my voice smooth, steady, lacking even a tremor of vibration. It was just a confirmation on the floral delivery for the morning brunch. "You know how vendors can be." Arthur chuckled, oblivious. "You are a machine, Carolyn. Does the work ever stop?" "Never for the things that matter," I replied. I stepped closer to him, locking eyes. "Now, regarding the contract for your daughter's wedding, I have been thinking about what you said regarding the Venetian theme. I think we can make it happen, but we need to lock in the vendors by tomorrow noon. If we sign tonight, I can guarantee the import fees remain flat." Arthur looked surprised. He had been dithering on that contract for 3 months. He looked at me, seeing only confidence, seeing a woman in total control of her universe. "All right," he said, extending a hand. "Let us do it. Send the papers over in the morning. I have them on my tablet now." I smiled. "Let us get it done so you can enjoy the rest of the night." 10 minutes later, I had secured a $200,000 contract. I signed my name with a flourish, the ink flowing black and permanent, while Grant was likely high-fiving himself in first class, thinking he had destroyed me. I had just earned back nearly half of what he stole. I stayed at the party for another 2 hours. I danced. I networked. I ate a canapé of smoked salmon and caviar and tasted every layer of the flavor. I did not let my smile falter for a single second. It was only when the last guest had departed and the cleanup crew began to strip the tables that I allowed myself to walk out to the waiting limousine. "Home, Mrs. Southgate?" the driver asked. "Yes, James, thank you." I sat in the back of the dark car, watching the city blur past. Now, the silence was real. I closed my eyes and let the memory of the morning play back. It had been 8 o'clock. Grant was packing his leather weekender bag. He was wearing the cashmere sweater I had bought him for his birthday. He looked handsome, in that superficial, catalog model way that had attracted me to him 7 years ago. He had come into the kitchen where I was drinking my espresso. "Chicago is going to be brutal," he had said, pouring himself a coffee. "Meetings back to back. I probably won't be able to talk much until the evenings. Focus on the presentation," I had told him, adjusting his collar. "You need this win." He had smiled, a tight, thin expression that did not reach his eyes. Right, the win. He had kissed me. I remembered the sensation of his lips. They were dry. He had pulled away quickly, grabbed his bag, and walked out the door without looking back. Liar. He had been planning it then. He had been looking at me, knowing he was about to steal nearly $500,000 from the woman who had built the lifestyle he enjoyed. And he felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. He probably felt a thrill. The thrill of the heist. The car pulled up to our building on Park Avenue. The doorman opened the door with his usual deference. "Good evening, Mrs. Southgate. Mr. Harrison left earlier with quite a bit of luggage. He said he was heading to the airport for a long trip." "Yes," I said, my face a mask of pleasant indifference. "He has an extended assignment. He might be gone for a while." I took the private elevator up to the penthouse. The doors slid open, and I stepped into the foyer. The silence in the apartment was different from the silence in the limo. It was the silence of absence. I walked through the living room, past the grand piano Grant never played, past the art collection he pretended to understand. I went straight to the master bedroom and opened the walk-in closet. It was a cavernous space, divided down the middle. My side was pristine, color-coded. His side was ravaged, but as I looked closer, I realized the chaotic nature of his departure was telling. The racks that held his bespoke suits, the ones waiting for dry cleaning, were empty. The shelves that held his collection of vintage sneakers were bare. His watches, the Rolex Submariner and the Patek Philippe had given him for our 5th anniversary, were gone, but he had left things. He had left the sweaters from the Gap he used to wear before he met me. He had left the scuffed loafers from his days as a junior sales rep. He had left the photo album of our wedding sitting on the top shelf, dusty and untouched. He had taken everything that signaled status. He had taken the costumes of the man I had made him and left behind the remnants of the man he actually was. He had raided the joint account because he needed the cash to maintain the illusion. He and Sienna were going to Aspen to play pretend. He wanted to buy her the life I had earned, using my money to do it. I walked over to the nightstand. His reading glasses were still there. He didn't need those for the fantasy. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The Egyptian cotton sheets were cool to the touch. Most women would be calling their mothers right now. They would be sobbing into the phone, asking what they did wrong. They would be calling his phone, leaving desperate voicemails, begging him to come back, or at least to explain. Grant was counting on that. He was probably sitting in the plane right now, holding his phone, waiting for the flood of angry, hurt texts. He wanted the ego boost of my devastation. He wanted to feel like he mattered enough to break me. I picked up my phone. I did not open the messaging app. I did not open his contact. Instead, I scrolled down to the company directory. I pressed the call button for a number labeled Elias, head of cybersecurity. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, but Elias answered on the second ring. He was paid very well to be available on the second ring. Mrs. Southgate? His voice was rough with sleep but alert. Is everything all right? Is there a breach? Hello, Elias? I said. My voice was as calm as still water in a winter lake. No, the company is secure. But I have a personal situation that requires your immediate attention. I need you to initiate a Level 4 forensic sweep on a specific set of personal devices and accounts. Whose accounts, ma'am? My husband's, I said. He has just voluntarily terminated his residency here, and he has taken corporate assets with him in the form of liquid capital. I want to know everywhere he has been digitally for the last 6 months. Every email, every DM, every deleted photo, every location tag. And Elias? Yes, ma'am? I want you to flag any transaction he attempts to make from this moment forward. I don't want to stop them yet. I just want to watch them. Understood, Elias said. I'll start the protocol now. Thank you. Good night. I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the nightstand. I stood up and walked to the full-length mirror. I looked at myself. The black silk dress was still impeccable. My makeup was still flawless. There was no redness in my eyes. Grant thought he had robbed me. He thought he had stripped me bare and left me with nothing but a text message and a zero balance. He had no idea. He had taken the money. Yes, but he had forgotten who earned it. He had taken the lifestyle, but he had forgotten who designed it. I reached up and unclasped my diamond earrings, laying them on the dresser. Thank you, Grant, I whispered into the empty room, a cold smile finally touching my lips. You just officially activated Clause 14B. I turned off the light. I had a busy day tomorrow. After all, revenge is expensive, and I had $450,000 to recover. The morning sun that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 42nd floor felt intrusive. It was too bright, too cheerful for a woman who was technically in the midst of a marital apocalypse. I sat at my desk, a slab of black marble that felt cool under my forearms, and stared at the dossier file on my tablet. The file name was simply Project Icarus. It was the code name I had assigned to the investigation of my own husband 6 months ago. People often ask how a woman like me, a woman who notices if a napkin is folded 3 millimeters off-center, could be blindsided by an affair. The truth is, I was not blindsided. I was merely waiting for the hypothesis to be proven. The erosion of a marriage does not happen with an explosion. It happens with the quiet accumulation of grit in the gears. It started exactly 180 days ago. I remembered the date because it was the day Grant changed the passcode on his phone. For 6 years, his code had been my birthday. It was a sweet, if unimaginative, gesture. Then, one Tuesday evening while we were sitting on the beige linen sofa in the living room, I asked him to hand me his phone so I could check a dinner reservation. He flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of the muscles in his neck. But I saw it. He unlocked the phone himself before handing it to me, his fingers moving in a complex Z pattern that was definitely not my birth date. "You changed your code," I noted, keeping my voice neutral. "Security update," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "The IT guys said 6 digits is safer than 4. That was the first crack. Then came the physical transformation. Grant had always been fit. It was part of the package required for a man in his position. But suddenly, fitness became a religion. He began buying protein supplements by the crate. He spent 2 hours every morning at a boutique gym in Soho, returning home smelling of expensive cedarwood body wash rather than sweat. And the clothes, the clothes were the most pathetic indicator of all. Grant began dressing like a 25-year-old rapper who had just signed his first deal. He came home one evening wearing a neon orange hoodie that cost $1,200 and sneakers that looked like spaceships. "It is streetwear. Carolyn," he sneered when I raised an eyebrow. "You wouldn't understand. You are too stiff. You dress like you are going to a funeral for a bank." That was the new narrative he was spinning. I was no longer the successful partner. I was the oppressor. I was the wet blanket. "You are so controlling," he told me over dinner at Le Bernardin, ignoring the Dover sole I had ordered for him. "You optimize everything, our vacations, our meals, our conversations. It is exhausting. Why can't you be more free? Like the girls on Instagram. They just live, you know? They flow." I stared at him, cutting my fish with surgical precision. "Flowing is for water. Grant, success requires structure. See?" He threw his hands up. "That is exactly what I mean. You are a robot." It was around this time that Sienna entered the picture. He mentioned her casually at first, dropping her name into conversation like a breadcrumb. "My new Pilates instructor, Sienna, says my hip flexors are incredibly tight from stress." I looked her up that very night. Her Instagram profile was public. Her handle was something ridiculous like Sienna_soul_flow. Her bio read, "Life coach, Pilates goddess, manifesting abundance, 23. She was beautiful in a generic, manufactured way, perfect skin, chemically whitened teeth, and eyes that held absolutely no depth. Her feed was an endless scroll of her in spandex, posing in front of sunsets with captions that made no sense. "The universe breathes through you," one said. Another was a photo of a green smoothie with the caption, "Detox the negativity, intake the light." I scrolled back 3 weeks and saw it. A photo of a latte art heart. The location tag was a coffee shop 2 blocks from Grant's office. In the corner of the frame, resting on the table, was a distinct leather cuff with a silver clasp. I recognized it immediately because I had bought it for Grant in Milan. The validation came 2 weeks later, not through a dramatic confrontation, but through the laziness of a man who underestimates his wife's intelligence. Grant had upgraded his iPhone, but had forgotten to decouple his old iPad, which was sitting in the drawer of the guest room nightstand. He thought because the battery was dead, the device was inert. I charged it, I turned it on, and I watched the iCloud synchronize. It was a stream of digital evidence flowing directly into my hands. I opened the Photos app. There were receipts he had snapped to expense later. A dinner at Massa for $1,200 on a night he said he was working late on the Q3 budget, 2 tickets to a concert at Madison Square Garden on a Tuesday. But the most damning evidence was the Notes app. He had started a shared note, presumably with himself, but the content was clearly drafted messages to her. "She is unbearable tonight." One note read, "She is talking about profit margins again. I just want to be with you, breathing the same air. Manifesting our future. I put the iPad down. I did not throw it against the wall. I did not scream. Instead, I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. If he wanted to manifest a future without me, I would facilitate that. But on my terms. I hired a private investigator the next morning. His name was Mr. Vance, a man who charged $300 an hour and was worth every penny. I do not want you to beat him up, I told Vance, sliding a manila envelope of cash across the table of a quiet diner in Queens. I do not want a scene. I want a dossier. I want photos, dates, times, and hotel receipts. I want undeniable proof of adultery that will hold up in a New York court. Vance nodded, pocketing the money. You looking for leverage for custody? We have no children, I said. I am looking for leverage for assets. While Vance worked the streets, I worked the books. Grant became increasingly aggressive about our finances. He began making comments about consolidation. It makes no sense for us to have separate investment vehicles, he argued one night, pacing the kitchen while I reviewed a vendor contract. We are married. We should be building an empire together. That money you have in the legacy portfolio, if we moved that into a joint venture, I could manage it. I could double it in a year with some crypto plays Sienna told me about. I almost laughed. He wanted to take my blue-chip stock portfolio, built over a decade of blood and sweat, and gamble it on advice from a 23-year-old who thought the universe breathed through her. But I knew that if I said no outright, he would get suspicious. He would realize I was walling him off. I needed him to feel confident. I needed him to feel like he was winning so he would make a mistake. You are right, I said softly, looking up from my papers. I have been too guarded. We should have a centralized fund. Grant stopped pacing. His eyes lit up with a greed that was almost primal. Really? Yes, I lied. But let us start with a test run, a new joint account. We will call it the Growth Fund. I will deposit a significant amount of liquid capital into it. You manage it. Show me what you can do. The next day, we went to the bank. I sat there, the dutiful wife, signing the paperwork to open a joint checking account with full survivor rights and unrestricted access for both parties. I am transferring $450,000 into this account, I told the banker, loud enough for Grant to hear. This is for our future real estate investments. Grant squeezed my hand under the table. He thought it was a gesture of love. I knew it was the squeeze of a man who just realized he had hit the jackpot. He did not know that the $450,000 was calculated. It was exactly enough to make him feel rich, enough to fund a runaway fantasy, but not enough to ruin me. It was bait. But the real work was happening in the background, in offices Grant did not even know existed. For 3 months, I had been quietly meeting with my estate lawyers. I initiated a series of complex transfers. My ownership stake in Velvet and Steel was moved into a labyrinthine structure of offshore holding companies. The deed to the penthouse was transferred into a blind trust with my sister as the trustee. My primary investment accounts were locked down under a new LLC. I was scrubbing my name off my own life. On paper, Carolyn Southgate was slowly becoming a woman of very modest means. Every night, Grant would come home, smelling faintly of her cheap vanilla perfume, and check the balance of the new joint account on his phone. I could see the reflection of the numbers in his eyes. He was like a dragon sitting on a pile of gold, waiting for the right moment to burn the village and fly away. He became bolder in his insults. You really need to loosen up, he told me 2 weeks before the gala. Sienna says that women who hold on to control store trauma in their hips. You are going to age badly if you don't let go. I will keep that in mind, I said, sipping my tea. I watched him text under the dinner table. I knew he was telling her about the money. I knew they were planning their escape. I let them. I checked in with Vance every Friday. The file grew thicker. Photos of them kissing in Central Park. Photos of them entering a boutique hotel in Chelsea at 2 p.m. Photos of him buying her a charm bracelet at Tiffany's, using the emergency credit card I kept in the kitchen drawer. I cataloged every betrayal. I itemized every dollar he spent on her. I built a case so airtight it would suffocate him. The night before the gala, Grant was giddy. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Big day tomorrow," he said, clapping his hands together. "The gala, you must be stressed." "Business as usual," I said. "I am so proud of you," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue like oil. "You built something amazing." "We built it," I corrected him. "Testing the trap." "Right," he grinned. He looked at me, and for a second, I wondered if he felt any guilt. 7 years of marriage, Christmases, funerals, vacations, sickness. Did any of it matter? Or was I just a bank account with a pulse? He turned away to check his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his hair. "By the way," he said, "I might have to leave early tomorrow morning for that Chicago trip. I don't want to wake you." "That is fine," I said. "I will see you when you get back." "Yeah," he said to his reflection. "When I get back." I knew he wasn't coming back. I knew that the next time I heard from him, it would be via that text message. I looked at the dossier on my desk in the present moment. The timeline was complete. The trap had been sprung. He had taken the bait, the $450,000, and run to Aspen. He thought he had won. He thought he was free. I picked up my stylus and tapped the screen. Closing the file on the past, it was time to focus on the present. Grant was currently spending money he thought was his. It was time to remind him that in the real world, nothing is free, especially not freedom. I reached for my office phone and dialed the number for the bank's fraud department. It was time to close the net. While Grant was landing in Aspen, breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air of what he believed was his new life of freedom, I was sitting in my climate-controlled office in Midtown Manhattan, staring at a spreadsheet. To the untrained eye, the spreadsheet was just a boring column of numbers. To me, it was a piece of art. It was a masterpiece of financial engineering that I had titled The Icarus Protocol. I pulled up Instagram on my burner phone, a device I kept specifically for monitoring things I did not want linked to my main algorithms. Sienna had already posted. Of course she had. She had tagged herself at the Little Nell, the only 5-star ski-in, ski-out hotel in Aspen. The photo showed 2 glasses of champagne against a backdrop of snowy mountains. The caption read, "New beginnings with my soulmate. The universe provides. Blessed." I zoomed in on the photo. I could see Grant's hand holding the stem of the glass. He was wearing the Patek Philippe watch he had stolen from the closet. "The universe provides," I murmured to the empty room, a dry laugh catching in my throat. "Actually, Sienna, the universe charges interest, and the rate is variable." It was time to review the architecture of the trap Grant had just walked into. When Grant sent me that text message saying he had emptied our joint account, he believed he had committed a robbery. He believed he had taken $450,000 of my liquid cash, money that I had earned, and transferred it into his own private possession. He thought he was Robin Hood. If Robin Hood stole from his wife to buy designer handbags for a Pilates instructor, but Grant had never been a detail-oriented man. He was a sales director. He looked at the top line, never the bottom line, and he certainly never read the fine print. 3 months ago, during that period where I was pretending to be the submissive, supportive wife interested in his financial expertise, I had presented him with a stack of documents. "This is for the crypto investment platform you wanted to set up," I had told him one evening while he was distracted watching Monday Night Football. "Since we are pooling our assets in the new joint account, the bank needs your signature to authorize high-speed transfers and leverage trading. It just means we can move money faster." Sure, he had said, eyes glued to the screen as he scribbled his signature on the lines I had highlighted with sticky notes. "Just handle the admin, babe." He signed 5 times. He did not read the header of the document, which was not titled Crypto Authorization, but rather Unsecured Personal Line of Credit and Overdraft Protection Agreement. Here is the beauty of the setup. The joint account he had been staring at for months did indeed show a balance of $450,000, but that balance was not cash. It was a display of available funds. 48 hours before the gala, I had quietly transferred my actual cash seed money, the bait I had used to lure him in, out of that account and back into my offshore trust. However, because of the agreement Grant had signed, the bank account was linked to a personal line of credit in his name. The agreement stipulated that if the account balance dropped below zero, the line of credit would automatically trigger to cover the difference, up to exactly $500,000. So, when Grant logged in at the airport and hit transfer all to his private external account, he didn't move my money. He triggered a massive loan. He had effectively borrowed $450,000 from the bank, in his name, at an unsecured interest rate of 24.9%. He was currently drinking champagne in Aspen paid for with money that was costing him roughly $300 a day in interest alone. And the best part? The terms of the loan stated that if the borrower ceased direct deposit of their primary salary, which he had just done by quitting his job via email to his boss an hour ago, the bank had the right to call the full loan due within 30 days. He was not rich. He was nearly $500,000 in debt, and the clock was already ticking. But I was not done. The financial suffocation needed to be layered. I turned my attention to the American Express portal on my computer screen. Grant was addicted to the Centurion card, the black card. He loved the weight of the titanium in his pocket. He loved the sound it made when he slapped it on a bar counter. He loved the way waiters straightened their ties when they saw it. He had forgotten, or perhaps he simply chose to ignore, that he was merely an authorized user on my account. He was a supplementary card holder, the primary account holder, and the one with the credit history that qualified for the card was me. I could see his pending transactions in real time. A charge for 2 first-class tickets to Aspen, $3,200, approved. A charge for the suite at the Little Nell, $8,500, approved. A charge for room service, champagne and caviar, $1,200, approved. He was feeling invincible. He was swiping with the reckless abandon of a man who thought he had won the lottery. I picked up the phone and dialed the priority concierge number for American Express. "Good evening, Mrs. Southgate," the operator said instantly. "How may we assist you tonight?" "Hello," I said, my voice laced with a feigned, frantic worry. "I have a bit of an emergency. I believe my husband's supplementary card has been compromised. He is currently away and I am seeing some erratic spending patterns that do not match his usual profile. I am worried someone has stolen his wallet." "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that," the operator said. "We can certainly help. Do you want to freeze the card?" "Please," I said. "Immediately, and mark it as stolen, so that any merchant attempting to run it gets a pickup card notification. I do not want the thieves to get away with anything else. Consider it done. Mrs. Southgate, the card is deactivated as of this second." "Thank you," I said. "You are a lifesaver." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. Now, the theater would begin. I waited. According to the GPS data from Elias, Grant was currently walking through the luxury retail district of Aspen. He was moving towards the Hermes boutique. I could picture it perfectly. He wanted to cement his status with Sienna. He wanted to prove that he was the provider she had manifested. Nothing says "I love you and I am rich" like a $20,000 Birkin bag. I watched the clock. 10 minutes passed. Then, my phone lit up with a notification from the bank app. Transaction declined. Hermes Aspen. Amount, $18,500. Reason, card reported stolen. I smiled. A genuine, warm smile. 2 minutes later, transaction declined. Hermes Aspen. Amount, $18,500. Reason, card reported stolen. He was trying again. He probably told the cashier. "Oh, that's weird. The chip must be faulty. Try it again." I could imagine the sweat starting to form on his upper lip. The cashier, a well-groomed woman who had seen 1,000 men like Grant, would be looking at him with polite suspicion. Sienna would be standing next to him, pretending to look at a scarf, but watching him out of the corner of her eye. The first crack in the fantasy. He would have to use the debit card, the one linked to the joint account, the one linked to the loan. I refreshed the page. Transaction approved. Hermes Aspen. Amount: $18,500. Source: debit. He had done it. He had just added $18,000 to his debt pile. He was digging the hole deeper with every swipe, terrified of losing face in front of his mistress. 15 minutes later, my personal phone buzzed. It was a text from Grant. "Nice try with the Amex. Carolyn, I know you canceled it. You are pathetic. Did you think that would stop me? I have the cash. I withdrew everything, remember? You can cut up the plastic, but you can't touch the money. Enjoy your empty apartment, you jealous old woman. I am buying Sienna the world, and there is nothing you can do about it." I read the text twice. Jealous old woman. The insult did not sting. It felt like a diagnosis from a doctor who had failed medical school. I did not type a paragraph in response. I did not rage. I did not defend myself. I opened my files and located a specific PDF document. It was the countersigned loan agreement he had executed 3 months ago. I highlighted specifically Section 4, Borrower Liability, and Section 8, Interest Rate Schedule. I attached the PDF to a text message. Then, I added a single emoji. The smiling face with the slightly blushing cheeks, the one that looks innocent but is actually incredibly condescending. I hit send. I watched the delivered status turn to read almost instantly. I could see him standing on the snowy sidewalk in Aspen, holding his phone, Sienna tugging at his arm, asking him what was wrong. I could see him opening the file. I could see him zooming in on the document. I could see the color draining from his face as he realized that the cash in his pocket was actually a trap closing around him, and he had just tightened it himself. He typed back. The 3 dots appeared, danced for a moment, and then disappeared. He stopped typing. He realized that he wasn't spending my money. He was spending his future. I put the phone down and turned back to my work. I had a venue to book for the spring gala, and I needed to review the catering budget. Unlike Grant, I actually understood how to balance a ledger, but the financial ruin was only the first prong of the trident. The legal offensive was next, and frankly, that was going to be even more entertaining than the debt. The next morning, I arrived at the office of my attorney, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man who charged $1,200 an hour and scared judges just by clearing his throat. "So," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair and tenting his fingers, "he took the bait?" "Hook, line, and sinker," I said, placing the dossier on his desk. "He has withdrawn $450,000 against the line of credit. He is currently in Aspen, spending it on luxury goods. We have proof of adultery, proof of financial recklessness, and thanks to the documents he signed, proof that the debt is entirely his." "And the company?" Marcus asked. "Velvet and steel is insulated," I replied. The holding company structure held up. He has no claim to the equity. However, he is going to try. "Let him try," Marcus smiled, a predator baring his teeth. "So, what is the next move? Do we file for divorce?" "Not just divorce," I said, smoothing out the fabric of my skirt. "I want to file for immediate injunctive relief to freeze assets, although he has none. But more importantly, I want to address the fraud." "Fraud?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Grant used the company credit card, the one issued to him by his employer, not me, to book the flight to Aspen before he quit." I revealed, "I noticed it on the expense report he failed to submit before he left. He technically embezzled $3,000 from his employer to facilitate an affair." "And his employer is?" Marcus paused, knowing the answer. "His employer is technically a subsidiary of a firm that I consult for," I said. "I have already spoken to the CEO. They are pressing charges." "Carolyn," Marcus said, shaking his head with a mixture of awe and fear, "you don't just want to divorce him, you want to erase him." "He wanted a new life," I said, standing up and picking up my purse. "I am just helping him clear the slate. When I'm done with him, he won't have a name. let alone a bank account. I walked out of the law office and into the bustling New York streets. The air was cold, but it felt invigorating. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Grant. "What is this document? This isn't real. You tricked me. This is fraud. Carolyn, you can't do this." I didn't reply. I just hailed a taxi. He was beginning to panic. Good. Panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy people make excellent defendants. I checked the time. It was noon. In Aspen, it was 10 in the morning. Grant was probably trying to call the bank right now, screaming at some poor customer service representative who would tell him that yes, indeed, he had signed the papers, and yes, indeed, the interest was accruing daily. I imagined Sienna asking him why his card was declined. I imagined him lying to her, telling her it was a banking error, sweating in his new designer clothes. The trap was not just about money. It was about humiliation. It was about stripping away the veneer of success he had borrowed from me and showing him exactly what he was underneath. A man who could not afford his own ego. And the best part? We hadn't even gotten to the criminal charges yet. The little vacation in Aspen was about to become a state-sponsored stay in a much less comfortable facility. I looked at the city skyline passing by the taxi window. New York was a tough town. It chewed people up and spat them out. But if you knew how to navigate the concrete, if you knew how to read the fine print, you could own it. Grant had tried to play the game without reading the rules, and now he was about to learn that in the game of divorce. The house always wins, especially when the wife owns the casino. If ignorance is bliss, then Grant Harrison was currently floating on a cloud of absolute narcotic euphoria high above the Rocky Mountains. From the vantage point of my command center in Manhattan, which was really just my office with 3 monitors and a fresh pot of Earl Grey tea, watching his downfall was less like a surveillance operation and more like watching a reality television show where the protagonist is the only one who does not know the script. My head of security, Elias, had mirrored Grant's digital footprint to my private server. It was a terrifyingly easy thing to do when the subject used the password 123, for his cloud backups. So, while Grant sat in the plush lounge of the Little Nell, nursing a scotch and rewriting history for his mistress, I was reading the transcript of his life in real time. According to the audio snippets captured by the virtual assistant on his iPad, which he had foolishly brought with him and left on the hotel nightstand, Grant was currently midway through his heroic escape monologue. "She was just so stifling," Grant's voice came through the speakers, tinny but distinct. "Carolyn never understood passion. She treated marriage like a merger. I felt like I was living in a museum, not a home, but with you. Sienna, with you. I feel like I can finally breathe. That money I took? It is not theft. It is back pay. It is compensation for 7 years of emotional labor." I took a sip of my tea. "Emotional labor," I repeated to the empty office. This coming from a man who once called me from the grocery store to ask what a zucchini looked like. Grant was selling Sienna the dream. He was the misunderstood genius, the caged lion finally breaking free, bringing a chest of gold with him. And Sienna? She was buying it, at least for now. I switched tabs to Instagram. If Grant was the writer of this tragedy, Sienna was the cinematographer. Her story was a relentless barrage of consumption. Clip 1. A boomerang of them clinking crystal glasses. Caption. Cheers to freedom. Clip 2. A panoramic view of the snowy peaks. Caption. The mountains are calling and I must go. Aspen manifested. Clip 3. A video of Grant trying on a cowboy hat in a luxury boutique. Laughing. Caption. My cowboy. Soulmate new chapter. She was tagging every location. She was practically filing legal affidavits on my behalf. Every post was a time-stamped, geolocated proof of dissipation of assets. I forwarded the links to my lawyer, Marcus, with a note. Exhibit A through Z. Please download these before she realizes she is incriminating her boyfriend. But the comedy was about to turn dark for our Romeo, while Grant was busy playing the big man on campus. The banking system was grinding into gear. Earlier that morning, I had made a very concerned phone call to the fraud department of the bank that held Grant's personal checking account. This was not the joint account he had drained. This was his own private account where his paycheck was deposited. "I am worried," I had told the representative, pitching my voice to the perfect frequency of a distressed spouse. "My husband is traveling, and I noticed a massive, irregular transfer of funds moving through our accounts. I believe his identity might have been compromised. He is acting very strangely. Banks are skittish creatures. They do not like drama, and they hate risk." When you combine a report of irregular transfers with the fact that Grant had just triggered a massive overdraft loan on another account, algorithms start to flash red. At 2 in the afternoon, while Grant was likely trying to buy lift tickets, his personal account was frozen, not drained, just locked. Pending investigation. Review for potential money laundering activity. The screen on my dashboard read, Grant would not know this yet. He was still relying on the cash he had transferred to his digital wallet. Or so he thought. The first sign of the crash came in the form of a phone call. I was sitting in the conference room with Marcus and 2 junior associates, reviewing the final draft of the divorce petition. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. "This is it," Marcus said, checking his watch. The opening salvo. I put the phone on speaker and set it in the center of the mahogany table. "This is Carolyn Southgate," I answered. "Ms. Southgate?" A male voice boomed. It was a deep, performative baritone, the kind of voice that belongs to a lawyer who advertises on billboards near the highway. "My name is Richard Sterling. I am representing your husband, Grant Harrison." "Mr. Sterling," I said pleasantly, "how lovely to hear from you. I assume Grant is enjoying his ski trip?" "My client is currently in a safe location, distancing himself from a toxic domestic environment," Sterling said. He was reading from a script. I could hear the paper rustling. "I am calling to initiate a dialogue regarding the equitable distribution of marital assets." Marcus covered his mouth to hide a smile. "I am listening," I said. "Mr. Harrison is willing to be reasonable," Sterling continued, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "He acknowledges that the marriage is irretrievably broken. He is willing to settle quickly. We are looking for a 50-50 split of all liquid assets, the sale of the Park Avenue penthouse with proceeds divided equally, and, of course, a 50% stake in the valuation of your company. Velvet and steel." The room went silent. The junior associates looked terrified. Marcus looked like he was watching a child try to perform brain surgery with a spoon. "I am sorry," I said, my voice genuinely confused. "Did you say 50% of velvet and steel?" "That is correct," Sterling said. The company was grown significantly during the course of the marriage. Under New York equitable distribution laws, Mr. Harrison is entitled to his share of that appreciation. He supported you while you built that business. I looked at Marcus. He nodded. It was time. I let out a laugh. It was not a polite, social chuckle. It was a full-bodied, rich laugh that bounced off the glass walls of the conference room. "Mr. Sterling," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think you need to have a better conversation with your client. Or perhaps you should do a basic corporate record search." "Excuse me?" Sterling sounded offended. "Velvet and steel is not a marital asset," I said, my voice sharpening into steel. "Velvet and Steel is a wholly owned subsidiary of V&S Holdings Limited, an entity incorporated in Nevis 3 years before I met Grant. The shares are held in an irrevocable trust. I am merely a salaried employee of the company. I own nothing in my own name. Grant owns 50% of nothing." That cannot be right," Sterling stammered. "He said you own it. He also said he loved me," I countered. "He is often wrong. Furthermore, regarding the penthouse, if you check the deed, you will find it is also held by the trust. Grant has been living in corporate housing for 7 years. He just didn't know it." "This is preposterous," Sterling blustered. "We will subpoena the records." "Please do." Marcus spoke up for the first time, his voice smooth and dangerous. "And while you are at it, Mr. Sterling, You might want to ask your client about the $450,000 unsecured loan he just took out in his own name. We will be seeking to saddle him with that entire debt as part of the settlement, given that he used the funds for non-marital purposes, specifically, to fund a vacation with his mistress. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. A loan? Sterling asked weakly. He told me he withdrew savings. He was mistaken, I said. He withdrew credit at 24% interest. Good luck with your retainer, Mr. Sterling. I hope you got paid up front. I hung up the phone. The conference room erupted in laughter. It was the sound of total victory. But in Aspen, the reality was hitting Grant in a much more visceral way. It was dinner time. Grant, still riding the high of his imaginary wealth, had taken Sienna to Matsuhisa. It was the most expensive sushi restaurant in town. He wanted to show off. According to the transaction logs Elias was monitoring, Grant attempted to pay the bill at 9:30 in the evening. The bill was $600. Transaction declined. Debit card. Ending in 4092. Reason: frozen by issuer. Grant must have stared at the waiter in disbelief. He would have pulled out his phone to check his banking app. That was when he would see the notification on his personal account. Access restricted. Contact fraud department. He had no access to his salary account. The joint account was maxed out and now frozen because he had missed a verification text I had arranged to be sent to my phone. Not his, and the credit cards were dead. He was sitting in a restaurant with $600 of sushi in his stomach and $0 of access to the world. I could picture the scene. Grant, sweating in his cashmere sweater, leaning over to Sienna. "Babe," he would whisper, "there is a glitch. The bank is doing some security update because of the travel. My cards are acting up." Sienna, who had just posted a photo of her spicy tuna roll with the caption "Abundance," would look at him. The smile would falter. "What do you mean?" she would ask. "I mean, I can't get the bill," Grant would say, laughing nervously. "Can you cover it? I will transfer it to you as soon as I call them in the morning." This was the pivot point. Sienna was a life coach. She believed in manifesting wealth, not paying for it. She was 23. She was likely carrying a purse that cost more than her car. But her actual liquidity was probably enough for a salad and an Uber, not a $600 blowout, but she had to pay. I saw the transaction hit her card a few minutes later. Sienna Miller, Visa debit, $640. She was a bad tipper. They walked out of the restaurant, but the air between them had changed. I knew it. The dynamic had shifted. Grant was no longer the provider. He was a liability. He needed cash, desperately. He went to an ATM. I saw the location ping. It was a generic cash machine in the lobby of their hotel. Grant inserted the debit card from the joint account. He punched in his PIN. Access denied. He tried his personal debit card. Card retained by machine. The machine actually ate his card. I had flagged it as stolen with the issuing bank an hour ago. The machine did exactly what it was programmed to do. It confiscated the property of the bank to protect the customer. Grant was now standing in the lobby of a 5-star hotel with no cards, no cash, and a mistress who was rapidly losing her patience. He sent me another text. "Carolyn, you are sick. You froze the accounts. Giving me no access to my own money is illegal. I will sue you," I replied instantly. "Correction. Grant, I froze my accounts. The joint account is overdrawn by $500,000. The bank froze it because you are a credit risk. And your personal account? I have no idea. Maybe you should call them. Oh wait, you can't. It is after business hours." I watched the dot that represented Grant move from the lobby up to the room. It was moving slowly. The strut was gone, up in the room. The conversation would be excruciating. "Why is your wife controlling your money?" Sienna would ask, sitting on the edge of the bed, arms crossed. "I thought you said you were the one who made all the money." "I do," Grant would yell, his face red. "She is just manipulating the system. It is temporary. Tomorrow, I will fix it. I will get a lawyer." "You better," Sienna would say. looking at her phone, perhaps deleting the soulmate hashtag from her last post. Because I didn't come to Aspen to pay for your California rolls. The illusion was shattering. Grant had built a castle on a foundation of lies and other people's money. Now, the landlord was here to collect, and the rent was overdue. I packed up my briefcase. It had been a productive day. I had exposed a fraud, secured my company, and turned my cheating husband into a pauper, all without raising my voice. "Good night, Marcus," I said to my lawyer. "Same time tomorrow?" "Absolutely," Marcus grinned. "Tomorrow is when we file the restraining order, correct?" "Yes," I said, walking to the elevator. "And the eviction notice for his things, I want them on the curb before he gets back, if he gets back." I stepped into the cool night air of Manhattan. I felt light. I felt powerful. Grant was in Aspen, trapped in a snow globe of his own making, with a woman who only loved him when the credit card worked. I hailed a cab. "Park Avenue," I told the driver. I was going home to a quiet, empty apartment, and for the first time in 7 years. The emptiness didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. Monday morning arrived like the strike of a heavy iron gavel. While the rest of New York City was shaking off the weekend and grabbing their first coffee, my legal team was already launching a tactical nuclear strike on the court system. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Marcus Thorne stood before a clerk at the New York Supreme Court. He did not merely file a petition for the dissolution of marriage. That would have been too pedestrian, too gentle. Instead, he filed a multifaceted complaint that included allegations of grand larceny, fraudulent conveyance of assets, and tortious interference with business operations. By 8:30, a judge who Marcus had played golf with for 20 years signed an ex parte temporary restraining order. This order was not just about keeping Grant away from me physically. It was a financial straitjacket. It froze every asset that could even theoretically be linked to Grant Harrison. It extended to his checking accounts, his retirement funds, and even the contents of a small safety deposit box he kept at a branch in Midtown. The legal term for this is a Mareva injunction, a freezing order designed to prevent a defendant from dissipating assets before a judgment can be reached. I preferred to call it strangulation. While the paperwork was being stamped in Manhattan, the real drama was unfolding 2,000 miles away in the snowy peaks of Colorado. Grant was sleeping in. He was likely exhausted from the stress of the previous night, where his cards had been declined and his ego had been bruised. He was probably dreaming that it was all a mistake, a banking glitch that a phone call would fix. At 9 o'clock Aspen time, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the door of the suite at the Little Nell. I was not there, of course, but I didn't need to be. The hotel manager, a woman named Evelyn, whom I had worked with on a destination wedding 3 years prior, was keeping me informed. Plus, the police report that would be filed later that day filled in the rest of the sensory details. Grant opened the door wearing a hotel bathrobe. Looking disheveled and irritated, he expected room service. Instead, he found 2 officers from the Aspen Police Department and the hotel's head of security. "Grant Harrison?" one of the officers asked. "Yes," Grant said, rubbing his eyes. "What is this about?" "We received a notification from American Express regarding the fraudulent use of a stolen credit card to secure this suite," the officer stated. "The cardholder, a Mrs. Carolyn Southgate, has reported the card stolen and the charges unauthorized. Additionally, we have been informed that you attempted to use the same stolen instrument at a Hermes boutique yesterday." "Stolen?" Grant's voice cracked. No, you don't understand. That is my wife's card. I am an authorized user. She is just doing this to spite me because we are having a fight." "Sir," the officer said, stepping into the room, "the card has been flagged as stolen. You are in possession of stolen property, and since the amount charged exceeds $2,000, this is a felony investigation." "This is insane," Grant shouted, backing up. Sienna, tell them." And this was the moment where the modern age added a layer of cruelty that even I had not anticipated. Sienna was awake. She was sitting up in bed, clutching the duvet to her chest, but she wasn't looking at Grant with concern. She was holding her phone up, the ring light case illuminating her face. She was live streaming. I watched the replay of it later. It was a masterclass in survival instinct. As the police began to handcuff Grant, because he had started shouting and waving his arms in a threatening manner, Sienna was broadcasting to her 12,000 followers. "Oh my God, you guys," she whispered to the camera, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "I had no idea. I am so scared right now. The police are here. Grant told me he was divorced. He told me he was a millionaire. I think I have been scammed. I am just a victim here." "Sienna," Grant pleaded as the officers marched him out the door. "Put the phone down. Call a lawyer." "I don't know who you are anymore," she screamed back for the benefit of her audience, ending the stream just as the door clicked shut. Grant was led through the lobby of the hotel in handcuffs, the same lobby he had strutted through yesterday like a conquering king. Guests looked up from their breakfast cappuccinos to watch the man in the bathrobe being escorted into a squad car. He was taken to the Pitkin County Jail for processing. Because his assets were frozen and his cards were dead, he could not post the $5,000 bail immediately. He had to sit in a holding cell for 6 hours until a public defender could be assigned to him. Back in New York, the second wave of the assault began. My phone rang at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The caller ID displayed Beatrice Harrison, Grant's mother. Beatrice was a woman who believed her son was the second coming of Christ, and that I was the Romans, the cross, and the nails all rolled into one. She had never liked me. I was too independent, too career-focused, and I didn't let her rearrange my furniture. I picked up the phone. "You are a monster," she spat before I could even say hello. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, leaning back in my chair and watching the city traffic below. "I assume you have heard about Grant's legal troubles." "Legal troubles?" she shrieked. Her voice was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "You had him arrested. You canceled his cards. You stranded him in the snow. He is your husband, Carolyn. How can you be so cruel? He is a good man who made a small mistake." "A small mistake," I repeated. "He emptied our bank account. Beatrice, he abandoned me via text message at a charity gala. He ran off with a 23-year-old Pilates instructor. He was driven to it," she yelled. "You were cold to him. You chose your career over him. A man has needs. He needed affection, and you gave him nothing but contracts and schedules. And now you are trying to destroy him because he found someone who actually treats him like a man. You are vindictive and evil." "Is that what he told you?" I asked calmly. "That he left because I was cold?" "I know my son," she cried. "He is loyal. He would never have strayed if you hadn't pushed him away. He is a victim of your ambition." "Beatrice," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious, "I am going to send you a file. I want you to watch it. And then, if you still want to call me evil, you can call me back. I don't want to see your lies." "It is not a lie," I said. "It is a video from the security camera in my bedroom, the one I installed after the cleaning lady stole a necklace last year. Grant knew it was there. He just forgot." I tapped the screen and sent the file. It was a video dated August 12th, 4 months ago. I was in London for the Fashion Week kickoff. In the video, the door to our bedroom opens. Grant walks in, laughing, leading Sienna by the hand. They are both drunk. Grant pushes her onto the bed I chose, with the sheets I bought, and they begin to undress. But it wasn't just the act. It was the dialogue. The audio was crystal clear. "This is so much better than sleeping with the Ice Queen," Grant says in the video, fumbling with his belt. "God, she is so boring. I can't wait until her company goes public so I can cash out and we can really live." "She has no idea?" Sienna giggles. "She is clueless," Grant laughs. "She thinks I am at a conference. She is just a cash cow. Babe, that is all she is." I waited on the line while Beatrice watched it. I heard the tiny, tinny sounds of the video playing in the background on her end. I heard her son's voice calling me a cash cow. I heard the sounds of them defiling the marriage bed. The video ended. There was silence on the line. A heavy, suffocating silence. "Beatrice?" I said softly. "Are you still there?" She did not answer. I heard a sharp intake of breath. And then the line went dead. She did not call back. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was Grant's sister, Felicity. She usually called to ask for money or connections to clubs. I didn't answer. Instead, I went into my settings and blocked Beatrice Harrison. Then I blocked Felicity Harrison. Then I blocked his cousins, his aunt in Jersey, and his best friend from college. I severed the limb completely. By the time evening fell, Grant had been released on his own recognizance, largely because the local prosecutor realized that the credit card theft was technically a marital dispute that had spiraled out of control. However, the restraining order Marcus had filed was now active. Grant was legally prohibited from contacting me. He was also penniless. The police had confiscated the stolen cards as evidence. The hotel had evicted him and seized his luggage as collateral for the unpaid room charges. Sienna was long gone. She had caught a flight back to Los Angeles an hour after her live stream ended, paid for by her parents. Grant was standing on the curb outside the Aspen police station. It was snowing. He was wearing the clothes he was arrested in, a tracksuit and a light jacket. His Canada Goose parka was in the confiscated luggage. He had his phone, but no data plan because I had canceled the family plan an hour ago. He could only use Wi-Fi. He managed to find an open Wi-Fi network at a nearby coffee shop. He sent me an email. It was the only way he could reach me. "Carolyn, please, I am freezing. I have no money. I can't get a flight. Help me." I read the email while sitting in a warm bath, a glass of Merlot in my hand. I replied, "The Greyhound bus station is 4 blocks from where you are. A ticket to New York is $218. I have authorized a one-time transfer of exactly $220 to the Western Union at the pharmacy across the street. The code is Justice. Don't spend it on snacks. It is a long ride. Grant Harrison, the man who flew private, the man who demanded Egyptian cotton, the man who thought he was too good for my ambition. Had to walk through the snow to a Western Union. He had to stand in line behind people sending money home to their families. He had to show his ID and accept the cash, and then he had to board a bus. It takes 42 hours to get from Aspen to New York City by bus. There are layovers in Denver, Omaha, and Chicago. The seats do not recline fully. The air smells of diesel fumes and stale sandwiches. There is no champagne. Grant spent 3 days on that bus. I tracked his progress casually, checking the bus schedules. I imagined him trying to sleep with his head against the vibrating window, his knees cramped against the seat in front of him. I imagined him thinking about the first-class lie-flat seat he had flown out on. Every mile of that journey was a lesson. Every pothole was a reminder. He had wanted to leave me. He had wanted to go on a journey. Well, I had given him one. When he finally arrived at the Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan, he looked like a ghost, unshaven, smelling of sweat and despair, wearing a wrinkled tracksuit. He walked out onto 8th Avenue, blinking in the harsh city lights. He probably thought the worst was over. He probably thought he could go to his parents' house, regroup, and hire a lawyer to fight me. He was wrong. The legal war had barely begun. The ride was just the commute to his execution. I turned off my iPad and stepped out of the bath. I wrapped myself in a thick, soft towel. I slept soundly that night, taking up the entire center of the bed, while Grant was dragging his battered suitcase through the gritty slush of the Port Authority bus terminal, trying to scrub the scent of 42 hours of public transit from his skin with a wet wipe. I was standing on a podium at the Pierre Hotel. The flashbulbs were blinding, a rhythmic strobe light of validation. I was wearing a white Alexander McQueen suit, sharp enough to cut glass, and I was smiling. "Velvet and Steel is proud to announce our partnership with the Global Arts Initiative," I said into the microphone. My voice projected clearly to the room full of journalists, investors, and socialites. "We are not just planning events anymore. We are curating culture. The applause was polite, restrained, and expensive, but beneath the clapping, I could hear the hum. The room knew. In New York City, information travels faster than light, specifically when it involves scandal. Everyone in that room had seen Sienna's live stream. Everyone knew my husband had been arrested in Aspen. Everyone knew he was currently broke and homeless. And they loved me for it. They did not look at me with pity. They looked at me with fear and respect. I had not crumbled. I had not canceled the press conference. I had stood up, looked the city in the eye, and dared anyone to ask me about my personal life. No one did. They simply took notes on my business expansion, terrified that if they offended me, they might end up on a Greyhound bus too. I wrapped up the Q&A session without a single mention of Grant Harrison. As I walked off stage, my publicist, a woman named Chloe who could silence a room with a raised eyebrow, whispered to me, "Grant is back in the city. Elias just pinged. He is heading to the apartment. Let him go," I said, accepting a glass of sparkling water. "The show is just getting started." Grant took a taxi to Park Avenue. He didn't have the cash for it, but he probably planned to bully the doorman into paying it, or run inside and grab cash from a stash he thought still existed. He arrived at our building at 11 in the morning. He looked like a shadow of himself. His designer stubble had grown into a patchy, unkempt beard. His eyes were bloodshot. His tracksuit was stained. He walked up to the heavy glass doors, expecting them to slide open. They did not. He pressed his hand against the biometric scanner I had installed 2 years ago. Access denied. He pressed it again, harder, as if force could override the code. Access denied. "Open the door, Henry," Grant shouted, banging his fist on the glass. Inside the lobby, Henry, our head doorman for the last decade, looked up from his desk. Henry was a man I sent a turkey to every Thanksgiving. I paid for his daughter's braces 2 years ago. Grant, on the other hand, never learned Henry's last name and frequently snapped his fingers at him to get a cab. Henry stood up slowly. He adjusted his uniform cap. He walked to the door, but he did not open it. He held up a finger, signaling Grant to wait. Grant watched, fuming, as Henry disappeared into the package room and returned with a single, medium-sized cardboard box. Henry opened the service door. Stepping out onto the sidewalk, effectively blocking Grant's entry, "Mr. Harrison," Henry said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Henry, the scanner is broken," Grant snapped, reaching for the door handle. "Let me in. I need a shower, and I need to deal with my wife." Henry didn't move. He was a large man, an ex-Marine, and he occupied the space like a boulder. "You are not permitted on the premises, sir," Henry said, shoving the cardboard box into Grant's chest. "Management has been instructed to bar your entry. If you attempt to enter, I am authorized to call the precinct." "Bar my entry?" Grant laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I live here. My name is on the lease. My clothes are upstairs." "Your name was removed from the guest registry on Monday," Henry corrected him. "And as for your clothes, Mrs. Southgate had your personal effects packed. This is everything." Grant looked down at the box. It was light. "Everything?" he whispered. "I have 20 suits. I have a watch collection. I have golf clubs." "This is the property that was deemed solely yours," Henry said. "The rest was purchased with funds from the Southgate Trust or company accounts. It remains in the apartment pending legal arbitration." Grant ripped open the box. Inside, there was a pair of old running shoes, some underwear, a few t-shirts from his college days, his toothbrush, and a bottle of cologne that was almost empty. "This is a joke," Grant said, his face turning purple. "She can't do this." "She can, and she did," Henry said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. "The taxi driver is waiting. Sir, this should cover your fare to somewhere else. Please do not come back." Henry turned around, walked back into the lobby, and locked the door. Grant stood on the sidewalk of Park Avenue, holding a box of old underwear. while the taxi driver honked at him. He was effectively erased from the only home he had known for 7 years. But Grant was not a man to give up easily. He possessed a dangerous amount of unearned confidence. He assumed that even if his marriage was over, his career would save him. He was, after all, the sales director at Sterling Corp. He brought in revenue. He was valuable. He directed the taxi to his office in Midtown. He walked into the Sterling Corp building, ignoring the strange looks from the receptionist, who usually flirted with him. He swiped his badge at the turnstile. Red light. He tried again. Red light. "Hey, Sarah?" Grant called out to the receptionist. "My badge is demagnetized. Can you buzz me in?" Sarah did not smile. She looked down at her phone, avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Harrison, Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the lobby conference room. You are not allowed up to the sales floor." "What?" Grant asked. "Why?" Before she could answer, David Sterling, the CEO, walked out of the glass-walled conference room near the elevators. David was a man who hated confrontation. He looked pale. "Grant," David said, not offering a handshake. "Let us step in here." Grant followed him into the room. On the table was a single white envelope. "What is going on, David?" Grant asked, dropping his cardboard box on the floor. "I had a rough week. My crazy wife is trying to ruin me. I need to get to my desk and close the nebulous account." "There is no nebulous account," David said, his voice tight. "And there is no job." Grant. "Excuse me?" "We are terminating your employment, effective immediately," David said, sliding the envelope across the table. "This is your severance, 2 weeks' pay. It is more than required given the cause." "Cause?" Grant shouted. "What cause? I am your top earner." "You were," David corrected. "Until this morning." Grant. "Do you know who our biggest strategic partner is? Do you know who refers 40% of our high-net-worth clients?" Grant stared at him. The gears were turning slowly. "Velvet and Steel," David said. "Carolyn?" "So?" Grant sneered. "She is petty. She won't mix business with this." "She already did," David said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She called me personally at 8 o'clock this morning. She informed me that Velvet and Steel is reviewing its vendor list. She made it very clear that she cannot in good conscience recommend a firm that employs a man currently under investigation for financial fraud and grand larceny." "I didn't steal anything." "It doesn't matter," David snapped. "The perception matters, Grant. She threatened to pull the entire portfolio. That is $3 million in annual revenue. I cannot lose $3 million to save you. You are fired. Security will escort you out." Grant was led out of the building by a guard who used to ask him for fantasy football advice. He stood on 6th Avenue, jobless, homeless, and holding a box of trash. He had one card left to play. The car, his Porsche 911 Carrera. It was his baby. He had customized the leather seats. He kept it parked in a luxury garage on 57th Street. It was worth at least $90,000. If he could get the car, he could sell it. He could get cash. He could fight back. He walked the 10 blocks to the garage. The exercise was good for him. He hadn't walked 10 blocks in 5 years. He found the valet manager, a guy named Marco. "Marco, my man," Grant said, trying to summon his old charm through the exhaustion. "I need the Porsche. In a hurry." Marco looked at a clipboard. He looked at Grant. He looked at the clipboard again. "Mr. Harrison," Marco said awkwardly, "I can't release the vehicle." "Why not? Did I miss a payment? I will pay you double next month." "It is not the payment," Marco said. "The owner picked it up an hour ago." "The owner?" Grant frowned. "I am the owner." "Actually, sir," Marco said, turning the clipboard around so Grant could see the registration document. "The vehicle is registered to V&S Logistics, LLC. A corporate officer came by with the title and the spare key. She took it." "She took my car?" Grant's voice was a whisper. "She said it was a company fleet vehicle being recalled for liquidation," Marco said apologetically. "She drove it out herself. Nice lady. She tipped me $50. Grant leaned against the concrete wall of the garage. He slid down until he was sitting on the oily floor. He had nothing, but the world was not done with him yet. The digital world was just waking up. Grant pulled out his phone. He had connected to the free Wi-Fi in the garage. His notifications were exploding. He opened Instagram. He had been tagged in a post by Sienna. The photo was a black screen with white text. Serious. Somber. The caption read, "I have been silent for 24 hours because I have been processing the trauma of what happened in Aspen. I want to make it clear. I did not know Grant Harrison was married. He told me he was separated. He told me he was a successful entrepreneur. I fell for his lies because I have a good heart and I believe in people. I had no idea I was being used as a pawn in his sick game. I am a victim of a narcissist who used financial abuse to manipulate me. I am so sorry to his wife. Carolyn, who is a queen and deserves so much better. Grant is a fraud, a broke, lying, manipulative fraud. Ladies, stay away. Survivor truth, girl power." The post had 40,000 likes. The comments were a bloodbath. "What a loser." One comment read, "Imagine faking being rich to cheat on your wife," said another. "I saw him on the bus." A third comment said, "He was snoring in seat 4B, smelled like old cheese." Grant Harrison was not just ruined. He was a viral joke. His reputation, the thing he valued more than his soul, was shredded. He walked out of the garage. He had $200 in his pocket, the money I had wired him for the bus, minus the taxi fare. He could not go to a hotel. A decent hotel in New York costs $400 a night, and they require a credit card for incidentals. He had no card. He walked west. He kept walking until the buildings got shorter and the streets got darker. He ended up in Hell's Kitchen, near the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel. He found a place called the Metro Motel. The neon sign was missing the letter O. It advertised day rates and cable TV. He walked up to the bulletproof glass of the reception desk. "How much for a night?" Grant asked. $80, the clerk said, not looking up from a magazine. "Cash only. No guests after 10. Grant slid 4 $20 bills through the slot. It was almost half of his net worth. The clerk tossed a key onto the counter. It was attached to a large, dirty plastic diamond. "Room 112, second floor. Don't smoke in the bed." Grant walked up the stairs. The carpet smelled of mildew and stale cigarettes. He opened the door to room 112. The room was small. The wallpaper was peeling. The bedspread was a polyester floral pattern that looked like it had absorbed 1,000 bad decisions. There was a cockroach moving slowly across the nightstand. Grant dropped his cardboard box on the floor. He sat on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked loudly, a groan of protest. He looked around. There was no view of the park. There was no Egyptian cotton. There was no espresso machine. There was just the hum of the mini-fridge and the sound of sirens outside. He put his head in his hands. Back in my penthouse, I was sitting on my velvet sofa, reading the initial reports from the press conference. The coverage was glowing. My stock was up. I checked my phone. I had a notification from Elias. Target location, Metro Motel, West 41st Street. Status, stationary. I took a sip of my wine. It was a vintage Bordeaux, full-bodied and complex. Grant was learning the most important lesson of economics. Value is determined by scarcity. And right now, sympathy for Grant Harrison was the scarcest commodity in New York City. He was finally living the life he could actually afford, and I was finally sleeping in a bed that didn't feel crowded by a liar. I turned off the lamp. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with the real estate brokers to discuss selling the penthouse. I wanted a place with no memories, and with the money I was about to make from the divorce settlement. I could buy the whole building if I wanted to. The fluorescent lights of the family court settlement room were designed to be neutral, but to Grant Harrison, they must have felt like interrogation lamps. I sat on the right side of the long mahogany table, my posture erect, my hands folded calmly over a leather-bound folio. To my left sat Marcus Thorne, my attorney, who looked less like a lawyer and more like a predator contemplating which artery to sever first. On the other side of the table sat Grant. It had been 5 days since he was evicted from the lobby of our building. The transformation was grotesque. The Grant I knew, the man who spent 45 minutes moisturizing his face every night, was gone. In his place was a man wearing a suit that was clearly 2 sizes too big. Likely purchased from a thrift store near his motel in Hell's Kitchen. His shirt was wrinkled. There were dark, heavy bags under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights on a lumpy mattress listening to sirens. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. Next to him was Richard Sterling, the billboard lawyer he had retained on a contingency basis. Sterling looked out of place in this room, his tie too loud, his cologne too strong. Presiding over this mediation was Judge Holloway, a woman known in New York legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway for how efficiently she sliced through nonsense in high-stakes divorces. She sat at the head of the table, reviewing the file, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "All right," Judge Holloway said, her voice dry and bored. "We are here for the preliminary financial disclosure and mediation regarding Southgate versus Harrison. I have read the initial filings. Mr. Harrison is claiming equitable distribution of marital assets, including a 50% stake in the plaintiff's company. Is that correct?" "It is, Your Honor," Sterling boomed, trying to project confidence. "My client is a victim here. He has been locked out of his home. His funds have been illegally frozen by his wife, and he has been subjected to a campaign of harassment. He helped build that lifestyle. He deserves his share." Grant looked up, trying to summon the puppy dog eyes that used to work on me. "I just want what is fair," he rasped, his voice cracking. Carolyn held all the cards. She controlled everything. I was just existing in her world. I tried to be a partner, but she bullied me. I didn't blink. I didn't roll my eyes. I just watched him perform. "Bullied," Marcus repeated softly, testing the word. "Yes, bullied," Grant insisted, gaining a little momentum. "She made me feel small, and she tricked me. She told me we were a team." Sterling shuffled his papers and pulled out a screenshot printed on glossy paper. He slid it across the table toward the judge. "Your Honor, this is Exhibit A," Sterling announced triumphantly, "a text message sent by Ms. Southgate to my client 6 months ago regarding the bank account in question. It reads, 'Grant, I want us to be transparent. This account is ours. It is for our future. This clearly demonstrates intent to commingle assets. She admitted the money was ours. Therefore, the debt she engineered in that account is also invalid. And the assets she is hiding in her trust should be community property.'" Judge Holloway picked up the paper, glanced at it, and looked at me. "Ms. Southgate?" "Context is everything, Your Honor," I said, my voice smooth and low. "That text was sent after Mr. Harrison complained that he felt emasculated by my wealth. I was trying to placate his ego, not rewrite property law. Intent matters," Sterling argued. "She led him to believe he was an owner." "If we are talking about intent," Marcus cut in, his voice like a razor blade, "and if we are talking about legal ownership, we should probably discuss the document that actually governs this marriage." Marcus opened his briefcase. He did not rush. He pulled out a document that was yellowing slightly at the edges. It was stapled in blue legal backing. He slid it across the table. "Exhibit B," Marcus said. "The prenuptial agreement signed by Grant Harrison and Carolyn Southgate 7 years ago. 3 days before the wedding." Grant froze. His eyes widened, fixing on the document as if it were a venomous snake. "That," Grant stammered, "that doesn't count." "It absolutely counts," Marcus said. Clause 4, Section 2. All assets acquired by either party prior to the marriage and all appreciation of said assets, including but not limited to business interests, real estate, and intellectual property, shall remain the sole and separate property of the originating party. Furthermore, Any joint accounts established during the marriage shall be subject to the contribution percentages of each party unless explicitly stated otherwise in a notarized addendum. Sterling snatched the document up, reading it frantically. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. "My client was under duress when he signed this," Sterling shouted, playing the only card he had left. "He was coerced. He didn't have independent counsel." "I remember that night," I said, speaking directly to Grant. The room went silent. "Do you remember, Grant?" I asked. "It was at that dive bar in the East Village. You were 3 whiskeys deep. You were angry because my father had made a joke about you marrying up. You were shouting at the bartender that you weren't a gold digger. You said, and I quote, 'I don't want her money. I can make my own. I will sign anything to prove it.'" Grant's face turned a pale shade of gray. "You demanded the papers," I continued. "You said you wanted to sign them right there on the bar stool to show the world you were a man of honor. We had to find a 24-hour notary on Yelp. You signed it with a flourish. You were not coerced. Grant, you were proud. You were arrogant. And you were sober enough to initial every page." "I was drunk," Grant whispered, but it was a weak defense. "The notary's affidavit says otherwise," Marcus noted. "And since you never contested it for 7 years, the statute of limitations on claiming duress has long expired." Judge Holloway looked at the prenup, then back at Grant. "Mr. Harrison, this looks ironclad. You waived your rights to her company and her premarital assets. That text message about the account being ours does not supersede a notarized contract. But the debt!" Sterling pivoted desperately. "The $450,000. She tricked him into taking that loan. That is fraud." "It is not fraud to allow a grown man to sign a document he didn't read," Marcus countered. "Mr. Harrison is a sales director. He deals with contracts for a living. If he signed a personal guarantee for an overdraft facility, that is his negligence, not my client's malice." "It is a trap," Grant yelled, slamming his hand on the table. "She set me up. She knew I would spend it." "Yes," I said simply. "I did." Grant stopped breathing for a second. "I knew you would spend it," I said, locking eyes with him, "because I knew you were stealing from me already. I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself." "Objection!" Sterling yelled. "Relevance." "It is very relevant," Marcus said. "Because we are not just asking for the dismissal of Mr. Harrison's claims. We are filing a countersuit for the recovery of funds, and to support that, we would like to introduce Exhibit C." This was the moment. The atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to heavy. Marcus pulled out a thick, black binder. He didn't slide it. He dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. "What is this?" Judge Holloway asked, leaning forward. "This," I said, "is a forensic accounting report from 5 years ago, from Grant's tenure at his previous employer, Orion Logistics." Grant's eyes almost bulged out of his head. He looked like he was about to vomit. 5 years ago, I explained to the judge, keeping my voice conversational, Grant was caught redirecting client refunds into a shell company he created. He embezzled roughly $60,000. He was going to be fired and prosecuted. Grant couldn't speak. "He came to me crying," I continued. "He begged me to save him. He said it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment. I was his wife. I loved him. So, I wrote a personal check to Orion Logistics for $60,000 to cover the error. I used my connections to hush it up. I saved him from prison." I opened the binder to a specific page. "However," I said, "I kept the records. I have the signed confession he wrote to his boss. I have the bank transfer records. And most importantly, I have a signed promissory note from Grant to me, promising to repay that $60,000 if he ever breached the terms of our marriage." I looked at Grant. He was trembling, visibly shaking in his cheap suit. "Adultery is a breach. Grant," I whispered. "This is blackmail," Sterling said, but his voice was weak. He knew he was drowning. "No," Marcus corrected him. "This is leverage. We are demonstrating a pattern of financial dishonesty. Mr. Harrison is not a victim. He is a serial embezzler, and we are prepared to hand this file over to the district attorney if we do not reach a satisfactory conclusion today." Judge Holloway opened the binder. She scanned the pages. Her expression shifted from boredom to disgust. She looked at the photos of Grant and Sienna in Aspen, the receipts for the $18,000 Hermes bag, the first-class tickets, and then she looked at the evidence of his past crimes. She closed the binder and took off her glasses. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Holloway said. Her voice was quiet, which was far scarier than if she had shouted. "You are sitting here, wearing a suit I assume you did not pay for, asking for half of your wife's company, while you have a history of theft, and you just spent $500,000 of borrowed money on a mistress?" "Your Honor, Grant started. "Be quiet," she snapped. "I have seen some audacious things in this room, but you take the cake. You signed a prenup. You signed a loan agreement. And apparently, you signed a confession for a previous crime." She turned to Sterling. "Counselor, if you proceed with this demand for 50% of velvet and steel, I will sanction you for filing a frivolous lawsuit. This man has no claim." She turned back to me. "Ms. Southgate, what are your terms?" I didn't look at the judge. I looked at Grant. I wanted him to hear it from me. "I want full repayment of the $450,000 overdraft loan," I said clearly. "Since the account is joint, the bank will come after me if he defaults. I want a court order stating that debt is solely his responsibility." "Granted," the judge said, writing it down. "I want repayment of the $60,000 I paid to cover his embezzlement, plus interest calculated over 5 years," I continued. "Reasonable," the judge nodded. "I want him to cover my legal fees for this entire circus," I added. "And I want a formal judgment for intentional infliction of emotional distress, valued at exactly the amount he spent on Sienna in Aspen." Grant looked at his lawyer. "Richard, do something." Sterling closed his folder. "Grant, shut up. You are lucky she isn't calling the FBI." "Mr. Harrison," the judge said, "you are leaving this marriage with a negative net worth. By my rough calculation, you owe your ex-wife approximately $600,000, and you owe the bank the principal. You are looking at a debt of over $1 million. Grant slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him like air leaving a punctured tire. He realized the math. He had walked in here thinking he could charm or bully his way into a settlement. He thought he could get a few million to start over with Sienna. Instead, he was leaving with a debt that would take him 3 lifetimes to pay off on a salesman's salary, a job he no longer had. "I can't pay that," Grant whispered. "I don't have it. I have nothing." "Then I suggest you start selling plasma," I said, standing up. "Or perhaps you can ask Sienna for a loan. I hear she is manifesting abundance these days." I buttoned my blazer. "We are done here, Marcus," I said, as I walked out of the room. I didn't look back, but I heard the sound of Grant putting his head on the table and sobbing. It was a wet, pathetic sound. It was music to my ears. But the checkmate wasn't fully complete. He was broken financially, but he still had his freedom, and there was one more card to play to ensure he never, ever darkened my doorstep again. The final blow was yet to land. The silence of victory is often described as peaceful, but in my experience, it is actually quite noisy. It is filled with the sound of incoming notifications, the rustle of legal paperwork being filed, and in the case of Grant Harrison, the incessant vibration of a phone receiving desperate text messages from a man who had finally realized he was drowning. It had been 3 weeks since the mediation hearing where Judge Holloway had effectively stripped Grant of his dignity and his net worth. Since then, the silence from his end had evolved. At first, it was the silence of shock. Then, it was the angry silence of a man consulting cheap lawyers who told him he had no case. And now, it was the noise of bargaining. Grant was currently living in a reality that he was wholly unequipped for. His friends, the fair-weather drinking buddies from the golf club, the guys who cheered him on when he bought the Porsche, had vanished. In New York, Friendship is often a transactional relationship based on proximity to power. Grant was no longer adjacent to power. He was radioactive. Even his mother, Beatrice, had stopped calling me to scream. I assumed she was too busy trying to figure out how to explain to her bridge club why her golden boy was sleeping on a pull-out couch in a motel that charged by the hour. I sat in my office, a glass of mineral water on my desk, and unlocked my phone. There were 12 new messages from Grant. I did not block him. Blocking him would have been an act of mercy. It would have allowed him to believe that I was angry, that I was hurt. Instead, I left the line open. I let him scream into the void, knowing that I was reading every word and feeling absolutely nothing. The tone of the messages had shifted dramatically. Gone were the threats of lawsuits. Gone was the bravado about Sienna and his new life. Carolyn, the first message read, sent at 2:00 in the morning. I can't sleep. I'm staring at the ceiling and all I can think about is that trip we took to Tuscany. Remember the villa? Remember the wine? We were happy then. I know we were. I remembered the trip. I remembered that I paid for the villa. I remembered that he spent 3 days complaining that the Wi-Fi was too slow for him to stream football. I made a mistake. The next message read, a huge mistake. It was a midlife crisis. Babe, that is a medical thing, right? I wasn't myself. Sienna meant nothing. She was just a distraction. I was scared of getting older. Can't you understand that? We can fix this. We can start over. I will sign a postnup. I will do whatever you want. Just please, let me come home. I read the words, let me come home, and felt a dry amusement. He didn't miss me. He missed the heated floors in the bathroom. He missed the chef. He missed the way people looked at him when he stood next to me. I did not reply. Instead, I took a screenshot. I had created a folder on my computer labeled The Audacity. Over the last week, I had compiled every begging text, every pathetic excuse, every attempt at gaslighting. I sent the files to a graphic designer friend of mine who specialized in avant-garde layouts. Print it, I told her. Hardcover, glossy finish. Title it, The Audacity of Mediocre Men, Volume 1. Are you going to publish it? She had asked. Laughing. No, I said. I am going to put it on my coffee table. A singular edition, art for an audience of one. Grant was not the only ghost haunting the city. 2 days later, I found myself face to face with the other half of the tragedy. I had stopped for a quick lunch at a salad place in Soho. It was not a place I usually frequented. Too much kale, not enough tablecloths, but I was between meetings and needed fuel. I was standing at the counter, checking emails on my phone, when I heard a familiar voice. For here or to go? I looked up. Standing behind the register, wearing a lime green visor and an apron stained with balsamic vinaigrette, was Sienna. She froze. The iPad she was holding to take my order shook slightly in her hand. She looked different. The Instagram filters were gone. Her skin looked tired. Her hair, usually blown out to perfection, was pulled back in a messy, utilitarian bun. She wasn't manifesting abundance anymore. She was manifesting a paycheck. Mrs. Southgate, she whispered. Her eyes darted around the shop. Terrified that I might make a scene, she probably expected me to throw a drink in her face or scream at her in front of the lunch rush. I simply adjusted my sunglasses. Hello, Sienna. I will have the harvest bowl with extra avocado and a sparkling water. She tapped the screen with trembling fingers. Right, harvest bowl. Of course. She swiped my card. The machine beeped. Mrs. Southgate, she said again, her voice low and urgent. I just wanted to say, I am sorry. I really am. I didn't know the whole story. He told me you were roommates. He told me the marriage was over on paper. I wouldn't have, I know that doesn't make it right, but I lost everything too. My followers hate me. I had to move into a place with 3 roommates in Bushwick. I looked at her. She was 23. She was a child who had played a game she didn't understand, led by a man who lied for sport. Sienna, I said, my voice calm. You didn't lose everything. You lost an illusion. Grant was never going to give you the life you wanted because he never owned it to begin with. The receipt printed out. She handed it to me. I know, she said, looking down. I learned that the hard way. I took the pen from the counter, on the tip line. I wrote 100.00, $100. Consider it a tuition fee, I said, sliding the receipt back to her. The lesson is this: never build your castle on a man's rented land. Always own the deed yourself. I walked away with my salad. I didn't look back to see her reaction, but I imagined she was staring at that $100 like it was the Holy Grail. It was probably more than Grant had spent on her in the last week of their relationship, but Grant was not accepting his tuition with the same grace. That Friday evening, Velvet and Steel was hosting a launch party for a luxury watch brand at a venue in Chelsea. It was a high-security event. The guest list was curated to the single digits. I was standing near the entrance, greeting the CEO of the watch company. When I saw a commotion near the velvet rope, security was tight. Men in black suits with earpieces who looked like they were carved out of granite. They were blocking someone. I squinted through the flashing lights of the paparazzi. It was Grant. He was trying to crash the party. He was wearing a tuxedo, but it was ill-fitting, clearly a rental or an old one that he had lost too much weight to fill out properly. He was waving his hands, shouting at the head of security. "I am her husband," Grant was yelling, his voice slurring slightly. He was drunk. "She is inside. I just need to talk to her. Tell her Grant is here. She will want to see me." The security guard, a man named Marcus, different from my lawyer, but equally intimidating, didn't even blink. He placed a hand on Grant's chest. "Sir, you are not on the list," Marcus said, "and we have a standing directive to deny you entry. Please step back." "Directive?" Grant laughed, a jagged sound. "She loves me. We are just having a spat. Carolyn, Carolyn!" He spotted me. He started waving frantically, jumping up and down like a child trying to get attention at a parade. "Carolyn, babe, it is me. Tell this gorilla to let me in." The guests around me fell silent. They looked at him, then at me. It was a moment that could have been humiliating, but humiliation requires shame, and I had none left to give. I looked at Grant. I looked at him with the detached curiosity of a biologist observing a specimen that had failed to adapt. I gave a nearly imperceptible nod to Marcus. Marcus understood. He grabbed Grant by the arm. It wasn't violent, but it was firm. Another guard grabbed the other arm. "Let me go!" Grant screamed as they dragged him away from the red carpet. "I built this. I am part of this. Carolyn, don't do this." They tossed him toward the curb, where a puddle of dirty rainwater had collected. He stumbled, his expensive rental shoes splashing into the muck. I turned back to the CEO of the watch company. "My apologies," I said, my smile perfectly intact. "We have a strict policy against uninvited guests. Shall we go inside? The champagne is chilled." Grant sat on the curb, wet and defeated, watching the doors close on the world he used to think he ruled. Later that night, the reality of his financial situation forced him to make a choice. He had run out of money. The $220 I had sent him was gone. The cash he had scraped together was gone. The motel in Hell's Kitchen was kicking him out because he couldn't pay the daily rate. He had one asset left, the Rolex Daytona I had given him for his 30th birthday. He had managed to keep it hidden in his pocket when the police seized his luggage in Aspen. He walked into a pawn shop on 8th Avenue at 2 a.m. "How much?" Grant asked, placing the watch on the scratched glass counter. The pawnbroker, a man with grease under his fingernails, looked at it with a loupe. "It is scratched," the man grunted. "No box, no papers. I can't guarantee authenticity." "It is real," Grant pleaded. "My wife bought it at the boutique on 5th Avenue. It is worth $15,000. "Without papers. It is just metal," the man said. "I will give you $2,000. Take it or leave it." Grant took it. He sold a $15,000 symbol of my love for $2,000 in dirty cash just to survive another month, with the cash in hand. He knew he couldn't stay at the motel. It was bleeding him dry. He needed a lease, a cheap lease. He found a listing on Craigslist, a studio apartment in the Bronx, 4th floor walk-up, no doorman, no laundry, 700 square feet of linoleum and sadness. Rent, $1,800 a month. He met the broker the next day. He paid the first month's rent and the security deposit in cash. He signed the lease with a shaking hand. He moved in that afternoon. He sat on the floor of the empty apartment. The radiator clanked loudly. A siren wailed in the distance. This was his new kingdom. He looked at the lease agreement lying on the floor. He hadn't really read it. Old habits die hard. He had just signed where the broker told him to. But now, with nothing else to do. His eyes drifted to the top of the page. Landlord, Phoenix Property Management, LLC? He frowned. Phoenix Property Management. He looked at the bottom of the page, where the fine print detailed the payment instructions. All checks payable to Phoenix Property Management, a subsidiary of V&S Holdings Limited. Grant froze. V&S, Velvet and Steel. He scrambled for his phone. He Googled Phoenix Property Management NYC. The search result was a generic corporate page, but at the bottom, in small font, it listed the board of directors. Carolyn Southgate, director. Grant dropped the phone. He wasn't just broke. He wasn't just alone. He was living in a building I owned. I had purchased the building 3 years ago as part of a distressed asset portfolio. It was a tax write-off, a place where we housed temporary staff or stored old event props. It was the bottom of my real estate barrel, and now Grant Harrison was my tenant. Every month, when he scraped together his rent money from whatever menial job he managed to find, he would be writing a check that eventually, through a series of transfers, ended up in my pocket. He couldn't escape me, even in his failure. He was contributing to my success. I imagined the look on his face as he realized it, the claustrophobia, the knowledge that the roof over his head was provided by the woman he tried to destroy. I was sitting in my penthouse, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed. It wasn't a text from Grant. He hadn't texted since he signed the lease. The fight had finally gone out of him. He realized that he was not the hero of this story. He wasn't even the villain anymore. He was just a line item on my ledger, an accounts receivable, and as long as he paid his rent on time, I would let him stay. After all, being a landlord is a business, and I never let personal feelings interfere with a revenue stream. The final act of a tragedy is rarely loud. In the theater, it might end with a scream or a gunshot, but in the American legal system, the end of a life as you know it usually sounds like the rustling of paper and the clicking of a stenographer's keys. I sat in the courtroom of the New York Supreme Court for the final hearing. The air smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. My side of the aisle was a phalanx of legal excellence. Marcus Thorne sat beside me, looking bored, which was his way of expressing supreme confidence. We had 3 junior associates behind us, organizing binders that contained the autopsy of my marriage. On the other side of the aisle, the scene was pathetic. Grant sat alone at the defendant's table. Richard Sterling, the billboard lawyer with the loud ties, had quit 2 weeks ago when the retainer check bounced. Grant was now represented by a court-appointed public defender, a young man named Mr. Henderson, who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days and had likely met Grant for the first time 10 minutes ago in the hallway. Grant looked small. The swagger was gone. The fake tan had faded, leaving his skin a sallow, pasty gray. He was wearing the same suit he had worn to the mediation, but now it was stained at the cuffs. He didn't look at me. He stared at his hands, which were clasped tightly together on the table, the knuckles white. Judge Holloway entered the room. We all stood. She didn't waste time. She had already reviewed the evidence. She had seen the forensic accounting. She had seen the prenup. She had seen the confession of embezzlement from his previous job. To her, Grant was not a person. He was a waste of the court's time. "Be seated," she commanded. She put on her glasses and picked up the judgment decree. "Mr. Harrison," Judge Holloway began, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "I have reviewed the filings from the plaintiff regarding the dissolution of marriage and the associated financial disputes. The court finds the evidence provided by Ms. Southgate to be overwhelming and irrefutable." Grant flinched. "Regarding the request for spousal support and equitable distribution of the company Velvet and Steel," the judge continued, "the request is denied with prejudice. The prenuptial agreement is valid. The assets are sole and separate. Regarding the debt incurred," she went on, turning a page, "the court finds that the $450,000 withdrawn from the joint overdraft facility was done so by Mr. Harrison for personal use, specifically to fund an extramarital affair. Therefore, the liability for this debt is assigned 100% to Mr. Harrison. You are ordered to repay the principal amount, plus all accrued interest to the lending institution." Grant's head sank lower. He knew he couldn't pay it. He couldn't even pay for a sandwich. "Furthermore," the judge said, delivering the final blow of the standard proceedings, "the court grants the plaintiff's request for damages regarding the previous embezzlement sum of $60,000, which Ms. Southgate covered on your behalf. You are ordered to repay this sum to her, with statutory interest calculated from the date of the loan." It was over. He was buried under $500,000 of debt. "Do you understand this judgment, Mr. Harrison?" the judge asked. "Mr." Henderson whispered something to Grant. Grant nodded weakly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well," the judge said. "Court is adjourned." The gavel banged. It was a sharp, wooden sound, the sound of a coffin closing. People started to move. The bailiff stood up. "Mr. Henderson began packing his briefcase, eager to get to his next case. "Wait," I said. My voice was not loud, but it stopped the room. I stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, I would like to make a brief statement to the defendant before we conclude. It pertains to the execution of the judgment." Judge Holloway looked at me. She usually hated theatrics, but she respected efficiency. She nodded. "Make it brief, Ms. Southgate." I walked out from behind the table. I walked to the center of the aisle, standing just a few feet away from Grant. He looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked terrified. He expected me to scream. He expected me to gloat. He expected the anger of a woman scorned. I smiled at him. It was a genuine, soft smile. "Grant," I said gently, "I wanted to say thank you." He blinked, confused. "What?" "Thank you," I repeated, "for the text message." The room was silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing. "For 7 years," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I thought I needed you. I thought my success was only valid if I had a handsome husband to share it with. I carried you, Grant. I covered your mistakes. I hid your mediocrity. I dimmed my own light so you wouldn't feel blinded. I was exhausted." I took a step closer. "But when you sent that text," I continued, "when you tried to destroy me in the middle of my gala, you gave me the greatest gift of my life. You forced me to fight, and in fighting you, I remembered who I am. I am not your wife. I am Carolyn Southgate. I am the architect of my own life, and I realize that my value does not lie in being your partner. It lies in my capability." Grant stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "So thank you," I said, "for leaving. It was the only useful thing you ever did for me." Grant looked down. "I am sorry. Carolyn, I really am. I am ruined. Isn't that enough for you?" "Ruined?" I asked, my tone shifting slightly. "Grant, you think this is ruin? You think owing the bank money is the end?" I turned to Marcus. He handed me a blue folder. "This is where it gets interesting," I said, opening the folder. "You see, Grant, banks are impatient. When you defaulted on that $450,000 overdraft last week, because you missed the payment deadline, the bank classified it as a toxic asset. They didn't want to chase a penniless man for the next 10 years. Grant looked at me. a flicker of fear rising in his eyes. So, I said, they sold the debt. They sold it to a distressed asset collection agency. I pulled a document from the folder. The agency is called Nemesis Holdings, LLC, I said. Do you know who owns Nemesis Holdings? Grant? He shook his head slowly. I do, I whispered. I bought your debt this morning. Grant, I bought it for 10 cents on the dollar. The bank was happy to get rid of it. Grant's face went white. I am your creditor, I said, my voice hard as diamond. I own the note on your life. You don't owe the bank $450,000. You owe me. He started to shake. Carolyn, please. And since I am the creditor, I continued, ignoring his plea, I have options. I could garnish your wages, but you have no job. I could seize your assets, but you have none, or, I paused for effect, or I could report the original nature of the loan to the district attorney. You signed a document stating the funds were for investment purposes. You used them for personal travel and luxury goods. That is wire fraud. Grant, that is a federal crime. With the amount being over $10,000, you are looking at a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. Mr. Henderson, the public defender, looked up sharply. Ms. Southgate, are you threatening my client with criminal prosecution? I am stating facts, I said. I have the evidence prepared. I can walk it over to the DA's office this afternoon. They love high-profile fraud cases. Grant looked like he was going to faint. Prison? Carolyn, you can't. I can't go to prison. Then you have a choice, I said. I pulled a second document from the folder. It was thick. This is a settlement agreement, I said. It is very simple. It states that Nemesis Holdings, LLC, forgives the entire debt of $450,000. It also states that Carolyn Southgate forgives the $60,000 embezzlement debt. Grant's eyes lit up with a desperate hope. You will forgive it? On 2 conditions, I said. I placed the document on the table in front of him. Condition 1, I said. You sign a permanent, irrevocable restraining order. You will never contact me, my family, my employees, or my business associates ever again. You will not mention my name in print, online, or in conversation. You will cease to exist in my world. Okay, Grant stammered. Yes, I will sign that. Done. Condition 2, I said, leaning in close. You leave New York. Grant froze. What? You leave New York City, I said. Within 24 hours. You pack whatever trash you have left in that studio apartment, and you get out. You do not move to Jersey. You do not move to Connecticut. You go far away. You go back to Ohio, or Florida, or wherever people go when they have failed. But if I see your face in this city again, if I see you on a sidewalk, in a restaurant, or even in the background of a photograph taken in Manhattan, I will trigger the fraud clause, and I will put you in prison. My whole life is here, Grant whispered. No, I corrected him. My life is here. You were just a tourist, and your visa has expired. I placed a heavy, expensive fountain pen on top of the paper. Sign it, I said. Or I call the DA. Grant looked at the pen. He looked at the judge, who was watching with an expression of grim approval. He looked at his public defender, who shrugged as if to say, Take the deal, idiot. He looked at me one last time. He was searching for a trace of the woman who used to straighten his tie and tell him he was special. He found only a mirror reflecting his own failure. His hand shook violently as he picked up the pen. He signed his name. The ink was black and permanent. Grant Harrison. He surrendered. Good choice, I said, snatching the document before the ink was dry. I turned to the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. You are dismissed, the judge said. I walked out of the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and I stepped into the hallway. Marcus was smiling. That was brutal, Marcus said. I have never seen anything like it. It was necessary, I said. We walked down the marble steps of the courthouse. Outside, the weather had turned. The sky had opened up. and a cold, gray rain was pouring down on the city. It was the kind of rain that soaks through to the bone in seconds. My driver, James, was waiting at the curb. He saw me coming and immediately stepped out, opening a large black umbrella to shield me. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Southgate," James said. "Hello, James," I said, stepping under the dryness of the umbrella. As I reached for the door handle of my waiting limousine, the courthouse doors opened behind me. Grant stumbled out. He had no umbrella. He had no coat. He stepped out into the deluge, and instantly, his cheap suit was soaked. His hair was plastered to his skull. He looked like a drowned rat. He stood on the top step, shivering, looking out at the gray, wet city that had just evicted him. He looked at me. He saw me standing there, dry, protected, surrounded by luxury. He saw the warm, inviting interior of the car. For a second, our eyes locked. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe a goodbye, maybe a final plea. I didn't give him the chance. I didn't frown. I didn't wave. I simply turned my back. I slid into the leather seat of the car. It smelled of lavender and success. "Where to, ma'am?" James asked as he closed the door. Sealing out the rain and the man. I looked through the tinted window. I could see a blurred shape on the steps, hunched over against the wind. "The airport, James," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. "I have a flight to Paris to catch. I hear the fashion shows are beautiful this time of year." The car pulled away, splashing water onto the sidewalk, leaving Grant Harrison behind in the gutter where he belonged. The engine purred, and we merged into the traffic. Moving forward, always forward. Checkmate. The concept of time is relative. When you are in the middle of a war, a single day can feel like a decade. The hours stretch out, filled with adrenaline, strategy, and the constant fear of an ambush. But when you are at peace, time becomes fluid. It moves like water in a clear river, fast and clean. It has been exactly 365 days since I walked out of that courthouse and left Grant Harrison standing in the rain. I am no longer living in the penthouse on Park Avenue. I sold it 2 months after the divorce was finalized. I realized that I did not want to live in a museum of my past mistakes. I did not want to walk down the hallway and remember where Grant used to stack his sneaker collection, or look at the kitchen island and remember the lies he told while drinking my espresso. I moved to Tribeca. I bought a converted industrial loft with exposed brick walls, 20-foot ceilings, and windows that look out over the Hudson River. It is a space that breathes. It is raw, honest, and entirely mine. There is no guest room for a husband who is pretending to be on a business trip. There is just a master suite, a massive office, and a studio for my yoga practice. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, a vintage Eames lounge chair upholstered in cognac leather, watching the sunset paint the river in shades of violet and gold. My laptop was open on my knees, but for once, I was not frantically putting out fires. Velvet and Steel has evolved. We are no longer just a New York event company. In the last year, we have gone global. We opened the London office in Mayfair 4 months ago. The launch party was held at the Tate Modern. It was spectacular. We had royalty in attendance. Minor royalty, but royalty nonetheless. I remember standing on the balcony overlooking the Thames, holding a glass of champagne, and realizing that I had built this empire not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because I was good at it. And next month, we are cutting the ribbon on the Paris branch. The office is on Avenue Montaigne, right next to the fashion houses that used to intimidate me. Now, they are my clients. I took a sip of my herbal tea. The silence in the loft was not lonely. It was rich. It was the sound of a life that had been decluttered. My phone, resting on the side table made of reclaimed wood, chimed softly. It was a specific tone I had assigned to a specific notification. It was the first of the month. I picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. There was an email from the automated payment system of Nemesis Holdings, LLC, the debt collection entity I owned. Payment received. Amount, $150.00. Payer: Grant Harrison. Source: garnished wages. I stared at the number, $150. It was a pathetic sum. It was barely enough to cover a dinner for one at a decent restaurant, but it represented everything. Grant was currently living in a town called Sandusky, Ohio. I knew this not because I stalked him, but because the court documents required him to update his address for the payment processing. He was living in the basement of his parents' house. The same parents who had called me evil. I imagined Beatrice was not thrilled about having her 40-year-old son back in the nest, especially now that he came with a garnishment order attached to his name. The rumor mill, which never truly stopped spinning, had delivered a few tidbits of information to me over the last few months. A former assistant of mine who had family in Ohio told me that Grant had found a job. He was not a sales director anymore. He was not closing million-dollar deals. He was selling term life insurance over the phone from a cubicle farm. I pictured him sitting there, wearing a headset, reading a script to people who didn't want to talk to him, trying to convince them to protect their families financially. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The man who had destroyed his own financial life was now lecturing others on fiscal responsibility. He was paying me $150 a month. At this rate, it would take him roughly 250 years to pay off the principal alone. He would be writing checks to me until the day he died. In the early days, right after the court case, receiving these notifications gave me a jolt of vicious satisfaction. I used to smile and think, good, suffer. I used to look at that money as a trophy of my victory. But tonight, as I looked at the notification, I felt something different. I felt nothing. The anger had evaporated. The need for revenge had faded. Grant was no longer a villain in my story. He was just a footnote. He was a cautionary tale that I had already finished reading. I opened my banking app. I did what I had done every month for the last year. I initiated a transfer. I moved the $150, along with a matching donation of $10,000 from my own funds, to a nonprofit organization called the Phoenix Fund. It was a charity I had established 6 months ago. Its mission was simple: to provide legal and financial aid to women who were trapped in financially abusive marriages. We paid for forensic accountants. We paid for divorce lawyers. We helped women find the hidden assets their husbands thought they had buried. Grant's money, the money he scraped together from selling insurance in Ohio, was now being used to liberate other women from men exactly like him. I confirmed the transfer. Transaction complete. I set the phone down. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep, bruised purple. It was time. For a year. I had kept a digital artifact on my phone. It was the original text message Grant had sent me on the night of the gala. The message that had started the war. I cannot do this anymore. I am suffocating. I have withdrawn everything. I had kept it as a talisman. Whenever I felt tired, whenever I felt lonely, whenever I doubted myself, I would read that message. I used it as fuel. I used his cruelty to sharpen my ambition. It was the coal I shoveled into the furnace of my success. But I didn't need the coal anymore. The engine was running on its own power. I opened the messaging app. I scrolled down. It was buried deep, past the hundreds of messages from clients, contractors, and friends. There it was, dated 1 year ago. I opened the thread. I read the words one last time. They looked small now. They looked like the tantrums of a child, not the decree of a king. Goodbye, I whispered to the screen. I pressed edit. I selected the message. I pressed the trash can icon. Delete this message? This action cannot be undone. I didn't hesitate. I tapped delete. The message vanished. The thread disappeared. It was gone. The digital footprint of his betrayal was erased from my pocket, just as he had been erased from my life. I took a deep breath. The air in the loft felt lighter. It was as if a heavy coat had been lifted from my shoulders. I stood up and walked to the window. The lights of Jersey City were twinkling across the water. I was 35 years old. I was the CEO of a multinational company. I was wealthy. I was respected. And for the first time in a decade, I was free. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I wasn't looking for a partner to validate my status. I was whole all by myself. My phone buzzed again on the table. I frowned. It was too late for business calls and too early for the London team to be awake. I walked back and picked it up. It was a text message, but the name on the screen was not a ghost from the past. It was Julian. Julian was a man I had met 3 weeks ago at an art auction. He was an architect. He was 40 years old, with salt and pepper hair and hands that looked like they knew how to build things. He was successful in his own right. He designed sustainable skyscrapers, and he had a quiet confidence that didn't require him to be the loudest person in the room. We had met over a dispute about a sculpture. I wanted it for the lobby of the London office. He wanted it for a private collection. We had bid against each other for 10 minutes. I won. He had come over to me afterward, not to complain, but to congratulate me. "You have an excellent eye," he had said, "and a terrifying poker face." "It is a business expense," I had replied. "Well," he had smiled, "if you ever decide to sell it, call me, or if you just want to explain to me why it is worth that price, I would love to buy you a drink." We had exchanged numbers. We had texted a few times, witty, intellectual banter about architecture and design, nothing heavy, nothing demanding. I looked at the message he had just sent. "Carolyn, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening. I discovered a small Italian place in the West Village that supposedly has a wine list that rivals the cellar at the Ritz. I would love to take you there this Friday. No business talk. Just wine and perhaps a debate about brutalist architecture. Let me know if you are interested." I read the message twice. My first instinct, the instinct forged in the fire of my marriage to Grant, was to recoil, to analyze, to wonder what he wanted. Did he want my connections? Did he want my money? Was he intimidated by me? But then I remembered the $150 payment. I remembered the charity. I remembered that I was not a victim anymore. Julian was not Grant, and I was not the old Carolyn. I could go to dinner. I could enjoy the wine. I could have a conversation with a man who was my equal. But the terms would be different this time. The dynamic would never be the same. I smiled. It was a small, private smile. I typed my reply. My fingers moved confidently across the glass. "Hello, Julian. That sounds lovely. I will check my calendar. But this time, I will choose the restaurant, and I will pay for my own portion." I hit send. I set the phone down and turned off the lights in the living room, leaving only the glow of the city coming through the windows. I walked toward my bedroom, ready for a sleep that would be deep, dreamless, and entirely my own. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate liberation. It has been a journey, hasn't it? I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city like New York, or somewhere quiet and peaceful? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Carolyn's final move. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Sweet Rose Drama, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay strong and write your own rules.